Hey everyone, this is Colin once again. Uh, this is a response to Farhan's video. So Farhan, I wanted to thank you for making your response in such a timely manner. I've written down several points that I want to address with regards to what you said in your video. I agree that we seem to be agreeing on a lot of topics. I think, ironically enough, after you made that observation, there were a number of points I think in your video that we may now be disagreeing on. But let me start at the beginning of what you said. You said differences of opinion is a mercy, and I agree. I agree with you 100% on what you said about this being a good thing. It allows us to, of course, observe our own personal opinions, to consider the views of others, and that's how we grow. And without that, you really just sort of, in a stagnant way, just sort of stay where you are forever and ever without being challenged. And I think we should be challenged on everything that we hold dear as far as our personal beliefs. Um, you said a lot in this video, and I have a tendency and a bad habit to ramble, so I really had to limit myself. So if I don't touch on something you said in your video, it's not because I don't uh, want to comment on it. It doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge it. But I still don't have the time. I'd be making several videos just to your one, which is a humbling experience. You mentioned the negative responses from people when you said that you were going more with the Mu'tazila and the Islamic philosophers. You had people saying, like, go back and learn the basics and things like that, and a lot of people really disagreeing with you. Um, and yeah, I certainly have had that experience as well, as you noted. It's very apparent as my subscriber count goes down every day. Um, and very apparent by some of the comments. However, I will say, though, that this has been a very interesting experience since you mentioned this. I've actually had more positive, like, personal messages, PMs from people, even comments from Muslims saying that they agree with what I'm saying. They either agree with what Michael Muhammad Knight has said in his books, or they agree with Mu'tazila approach to theology, or they agree with a lot of these. I mean, I've had a lot, Ibn Rushd and his views of theology. So, on one hand, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're going to take a minority approach within a religion, you're going to, um, and if the majority of the people who you are in contact with follow the majority view, of course, that's going to create some division. Um, I will say the Muslims I know in person, like my friends that I actually know, have been very supportive and understanding of where I'm coming from. So maybe I just lucked out. But as far as online experiences, I can agree with you on some of the reactions. Um, and then on top of that, I've actually had a number of people who have tried to say that I was like totally leaving the faith, as I've mentioned in some past videos. So it's kind of like once you say that you are don't identifying with the orthodoxy, suddenly people start projecting what they want of for you onto you. That's been kind of my experience, if that makes sense. You then talked about kind of like the reaction historically to the Mu'tazila and the Islamic philosophers, and you said that that when Muslims talk about the golden age of Islam, that it was because of these groups, and that by them saying, "Oh, isn't look how great this was," and I think of that line from Lawrence of Arabia when Lawrence says to Prince Faisal, "It's time to be great again, my lord," when they're talking about Cordoba. And yet you said that, well, look, these Muslims that criticize or put down the Mu'taziliya or the philosophers who were the ones who brought this golden age, isn't this sort of an odd thing to do? In my experience and in my readings, I would say that not all Muslims historically, and I don't know if you meant this, but it came off as this way in your video. I would say that not all Muslims historically have had such a negative view of the Mu'taziliya or of the Islamic philosophers. For example, Ibn Rushd, a number of his contemporaries certainly thought that he was a wonderful scholar, a wonderful khadi or judge of Maliki fiqh, that they really respected him. And of course, there were times in his life where there were turbulence. In my experience reading the history, it just depends on who's in charge. And I said this, I think, in my Orthodoxy and I video, that the if a ruler was a patron of these groups, then they were totally cool with this group expressing itself. The second that a ruler came into power that disagreed, then the crap hit the fan, if you will, for these groups. But to be honest, though, I don't think that's very unusual for any group within any organized religion. I mean, we could think of a dozen examples of when this has happened. Um, and so I think where I can agree with you on is to segue into your next point, which was Imam Ghazali and his views about mysticism trumping philosophy, as you said, in the incoherence of the philosophers. I think, though, that what's happened is people, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a subscriber, he's a friend of mine as well on Facebook. He noted this whole thing about how people, like, when they're looking at the progression of this debate about Kalam and about philosophy, they stop with Imam Ghazali and the incoherence of the philosophers, and they seem to argue that that's where the debate ended. They don't even look at Averroes or Ibn Rushd's incoherence of the incoherence and try to understand his arguments. And I would say this is probably a historical complex that has happened. I would even maybe I just should just call it an Imam Ghazali complex, where it's like this is the end all of information about this topic, because it's true. While Ibn Rushd's works are being recognized more and more, the more I talk about Ibn Rushd here online, the more messages I get from people saying I actually really agree with Ibn Rushd, and I have a lot of Muslims who are sort of coming out of the woodwork and agreeing with me on these things. Yeah, I just certainly would agree that there has been sort of a myth making experience of people saying that Imam Ghazali was the death blow of philosophy in Islam, and maybe that's because Ibn Rushd had the unfortunate timing of being born and living in southern Spain, and when the Catholics took back southern Spain, a lot of the works were taken. However, I should say that Ibn Rushd's works were absorbed and understood by the Jewish and Christian scholars such as Maimonides and St. Thomas Aquinas, and because of the translating of his works, a lot of the Greek philosophy was reintroduced to Europe. So he's been there. It's just that I think because of Imam Ghazali's works, a lot of Muslims either aren't aware of him or think that we can just ignore that. And again, I could be completely overgeneralizing. I know that he's coming back. Ibn Rushd is coming back in popularity. You said that in your opinion, mysticism trumps philosophy. I would disagree with you, mainly because I'm influenced by Jung's views of psychological types, personality types. I think people are drawn to mysticism because of their personality. And people who are really heavy in the rationalism are very big about philosophy, and it's a product of their personality. So this is a totally new subject I'm introducing to our ongoing conversation. But psychological types, being extrovert and introvert, having primarily thinking, feeling, intuition, or sensation as the functions of your personality. I've made a video on the subject, by the way. If you, I think I called it psychological types. If you want to check that out. I've meant to do more on the subject, but I haven't gotten around to it. But I would argue that if you're really drawn to mysticism, it probably has a lot to do with your personality. And we swing back and forth between some of these functions, and some of them we're stronger in one of these four functions than others. We have secondary, and we have very unconscious. The fourth function is really unconscious. But anyway, I talk about that more in my video. The point is that I think we experience life in a variety of different ways depending on our personality. I actually think that mysticism and rationalism with regards to approaching religion are both completely valid. They're equally valid. They seek the same thing, but you experience it differently. So with mysticism, you're right. You have the sort of subjective experience that's very personal, very overwhelming, very intuitive, defies words, of expression, except maybe in mystical poetry, which barely taps the surface of these subjects. And I agree with you on that. I think, however, that the philosophical approach is actually the same path to the same place. And one is not better than the other. That's not the point. The point is that we're drawn to certain things. And make no mistake, I am presenting a very rational view now, very much so. But I still consider myself a very spiritual person. I have had a lot of great spiritual experiences in the context of hanging out with more mystically inclined individuals, Sufis and things like this. So I'm not ignorant of the subject. I just think that in my experiences now, when I understand why I believe in what I believe in two different ways. Um, and I think we all sort of approach things in that unique fashion. You mentioned Ibn Arabi and the unity of existence, and I have not read a lot about Ibn Arabi. I have a very elementary understanding of Ibn Arabi based on people writing about him and quoting him. I'm familiar with William Chittick, and I will definitely check out Ibn Arabi. Rumi, I'm very familiar with. Rumi was one of the reasons why I converted to Islam. I own all of his poetry and very scholarly works on his life and his times and his works. I've met one of the leading scholars of Rumi translation understanding, Sheikh Ibrahim Gamard, who has done excellent work talking about Rumi in his Islamic context. Um, and so I guess I bring this up because I think that while I agree with you that the mystics are all speaking the same language, or the mystics certainly are tapping into something that's rather universal, that's very evident when you look at the quotations of the poetry of several mystics from around the world. They all seem to be implying about the divine in the same way. However, one thing I would argue, and I'm not saying that you were doing this, but I just want to be clear that maybe you'll disagree with me on this, is that I don't want to rip a mystic from their roots. In other words, I don't forget that Rumi was uh, a scholar of the Hanafi school of fiqh. He was a Ashari in Kalam, and obviously his son founded the Mevlevi school of Sufism, or order of Sufism. Um, and so I guess it's just the way of interpreting these individuals' works and what it means in a larger context. So on one hand, I do agree that they are obviously talking about very large cosmic and also at the same time personal concepts, but I also keep in mind that they had their own subjective biases because they were members of these organized religions. I can't speak so much for Ibn Arabi. However, I do remember making a video response that not you, Farhan, but the other Farhan, and this is really bad. I'm forgetting the other. You know him. There's two of you, and I forget the other Farhan's last name now. I apologize in advance to the other Farhan. Um, he had posted a video by Sheikh Yasser Qadi talking about Ibn Arabi and Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, and talking about how some of their opinions and beliefs were running counter to Islamic orthodoxy. At the time when I made that video, I considered myself an Orthodox Muslim, an Ashari, Shafi in fiqh, and I, made the video from that perspective, defending Ibn Arabi and Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, that their views have been misunderstood and abused by people taking them out of their cultural and historical and theological context, and it's trying to make them, quote, universal mystics. This especially has happened with Rumi. And if you look at the scholarly evidence, it's very clear that this is an abuse of their actual views. Now, again, I can't say for Ibn Arabi. I will direct you, though, because I did this in the video, to livingislam.org, who has a number of articles in Ibn Arabi, and I'd be very curious to see what you think about those articles, because they seem to imply that Ibn Arabi was very much in line with the Ashari Kalam, and he was a scholar of fiqh, uh, and that to divorce him from that would be detrimental to understanding him. Having said all that, though, make no mistake, I agree with you that that the mystics on a universal level are speaking the same language. And I think that is very important to remember. However, I would not want to take them out of their unique context, their specific context of who they were as people. Because Rumi himself said that he is the on the path of the Quran, the dust of the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, and if anyone says anything other than that of him, they are lies. And that's a direct quatrain from him. So just thought I would throw that out there. I probably went totally off a tangent here that you were not implying, but I just felt like just mentioning this because these were thoughts that I was having. when you mention these individuals. Anyway, told you. Anyway, okay. You then said Bar Ehrman and the mythicists, may imply that Jesus, that there are. You finally said that basically the mythicist argument is that they're saying that stories and legends are birthed out of historical persons. That's how I was hoping to paraphrase you. And this would explain miracles. And this is a really abstract concept because while I agree that miracles can't really be documented historically because they defy the laws of reality and that's why hence they are miracles. Um, I don't know if I would say that because there are stories and legends about people doing fantastic things that go against reality that somehow means that it's a myth or that's unhistorical. Um, and I think Bar Ehrman in a debate that I watched with him one time, basically because he is an agnostic, he essentially said that he's a historian, so he can only really speak on historical facts, and miracles lie outside of historical facts, so he can't really there's no point in really debating it in a historical way. That's why it comes down to faith and belief, as you were saying, and how do we understand what's the point of there being miracles even at all, and does it really matter? And those are things that we have to consider. And then you offer various opinions of the origin of these myths, especially when it comes to the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. You mentioned hadith methodology. You then said that not all you said that the Sunnis would be against Kalam, but I can't really speak on the founders of the four main schools of fiqh, the fuqaha, Imam Shafi, Abu Hanifa, uh, Ahmed ibn Hanbal, and Imam Malik. But there have been members of their schools and their methodology that have embraced, Kalam, whether they were Ashari, etc. There were even Mu'taziliya that were Shafi in fiqh. So I don't know if that comment by you was meant to just talk about the four founders or like just Sunnis in general. But I just thought should clarify that. Um, you then said about hadiths. Are the hadiths basically something that I'll just take for granted, or and I think I implied in my past video that I understand the concept of hadith criticism. I don't know if I would say the hadiths mean or equal archetypal concepts. I mean, as I said in my other video, uh, that one could argue, if one were to argue or say to me, well, hey, can I just accept that there are elements of the Prophet of Islam's life that follows the hero's journey in an archetypal or a motif? I would say that there's no problem with that, because if that means we can derive the lessons learned from the hero's journey from his life, it would be no different than someone expressing lessons from his life on a historical level. So I have no problem with that. Yeah, I will say that with the recent research I've been doing, the books I've been reading, I am much more prone to understanding hadith criticism and being a little bit more skeptical about people saying, "Oh, we'll see, all these hadiths are authentic, so therefore we should just agree with everything that they say." Considering that there have been a number of collections and another of specific hadiths that have been challenged by scholars throughout Islam's history. So while we may have collections where the majority of Muslims can say they have confidence that they are concrete, there is a long history of criticism with even hadiths that appear in the more authentic hadith collections. Um, and so, what does that mean then about the hadiths? I mean, I guess, like I said in my other video, I just stand by what I said in that other video, that when it comes to history, we are basically trying to understand the past based on the knowledge that we have. So I wouldn't say that the hadiths necessarily mean that they are myths. I mean, if there are hadiths out there, as Muhammad Assad argues, that one doesn't have to believe in literally, I don't know whether it actually happened. Do I know that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, actually went to Jerusalem on a night journey? And what was the nature of that journey? I mean, these are things that scholars have been arguing for centuries. So at the end of the day, if I just simply say about anything, about the hadiths, about the gospels, about the life of Buddha, if I just say, well, okay, we don't need to kill each other over or even debate each other to death about whether this happened at this date at this time, if we simply look at the lessons learned from these people's lives, that's the most important thing. And I think that's pretty much where I I draw the lines at this point in my life, is that it's the lessons learned, not necessarily debating about whether this happened on this day at this time, etc. You then said everyone is an agnostic, and you spent a lot of time talking about this subject, about labels. Do we know? Beliefs, finite about infinite, can just be tasted. Gnosis, the mystics, Muslim. What does it mean? And I would say that, yeah, labels are labels, and definitions of what it means to be one thing will vary from person to person. This is again a huge point of debate. If someone thinks that they are Muslim because they simply say La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, or even if they just say La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God, and if they essentially, as Muhammad Assad would interpret the verse in the Quran where it talks about Jews, Christians, and Sabians, if they believe in God in the last day and do righteous deeds, they will be saved. Um, I guess people subjectively can call themselves whatever they want. It becomes then an institution or an organized religion to say, if you believe in X, Y, and Z, it means you're this. But even then, again, what individuals want to call themselves and what does it mean by definition, again, that's a whole nother debate. And I'm not the one to judge anyone. If I met a person who said, oh yeah, I'm a Muslim, and then found out later that they were holding certain views that I know that the orthodoxy doesn't agree with, all I can say to that person is, well, the orthodoxy wouldn't agree with you that you to use that label for yourself. But I can't really judge anybody on that. However, I will say that when you say you're an agnostic, I understand that in the traditional sense that agnosticism essentially means that you just don't know. And you talked about the Gnostics, and the fact is, if they say that they're Gnostic, then they do know. So then it brings us to this whole idea of gnosis and this idea of Jung, and a lot of people have repeated this phrase. Imam Ghazali even said this, that if you know yourself, you know God. And Jung meant this in a psychological way of saying that if you understand your psyche, because your psyche, i.e. your soul, is from God, if you understand your psyche, you understand the one who made you in a personal way. In that way, I would say that you do know something, right? I may not have ever seen heaven or hell, or an afterlife. It doesn't even have to be a duality of heaven and hell. But I intuitively believe in an afterlife. I'm not sure of the details. At this point in my life, I don't even know. I don't really take astrology, and I agree more with the philosophers in saying that it may not be a literal place that we go to in a physical sense. But I have, my intuition, my gut feeling tells me that there is life beyond this one. My intuition has always told me that there is a God beyond rationalism. So again, talking about personality types. But yeah, a lot of it is about belief and faith and just how much can we understand. And I agree that we are just scratching the surface. But I don't. What am I trying to say here? I just don't know if I agree with saying that everybody is an agnostic. I think that we may all have. I think that we may have moments of agnosticism towards certain topics. We may be atheistic towards certain topics, But I don't know if I would agree with you that everybody is an agnostic. But again, this is all about this debate about labels. You then said the Eastern views of integrating all traditions. You mentioned this idea of everything is God, the soul being divine. And I don't even know if I can argue for that or against that. I mean, that's a profound statement. I don't know if I've read enough or understood life enough to be able to make such statements. I go with you about the whole perennial philosophy, universal concepts, and however, I think it would be difficult for someone to say confidently that they are members of all existing religions. I think you can take value from what has been said by certain faiths, as a lot of philosophers have done and mystics have done. But there's so much concrete theological concepts that are just blatantly contradictory that I don't know if I could confidently say I'm a member of all religions. but maybe that's just my lack of understanding of the Hindu perspective. I mean, I've read a lot about Hinduism. It makes total sense to me about why someone who's a Hindu would be able to say that. Um, but I kind of go with Muhammad Assad saying that revealed religions are from God. All revealed religions are from God, and that and I do agree with the perennial philosophy about there being these core concepts from the divine, the unfathomable that every major religion and has understood and expressed. Um, so maybe we're just saying the same thing. I don't know. And then as for yeah, I guess that's everything. Yeah, so I hope I touched on everything. It'll be interesting to see your responses to some of these things. And I sorry for my little tangent about Ibn Arabi and Rumi. I hope that wasn't completely random and time absorbing. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I look forward to your responses, Farhan. Peace be with you all.